This is episode 666 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined by Dean Stansel. He is Research Associate Professor at the Bridwell Institute for Economic Freedom. That is at Southern Methodist University. And most importantly for our conversation today, he is the lead author of the Economic Freedom of North America Index, put out by the Fraser Institute, a Canadian think tank, in the year 2024. So the index is relating to 2024, but its data is from 2022, and we can discuss that briefly. But welcome back to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Dean.
Well, good morning or afternoon, Paul. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, just talk about yourself and how long you've been involved in this particular index.
Sure. So for your listeners, I actually lived in New Mexico. I think I've told you this story, Paul, but my first job out of graduate school as a teaching professor was at Eastern New Mexico University, and I lived out there for 2 years, and then took a job in Florida, my home state. And so, but it was an interesting part of the state, and we love to come visit the pretty part of New Mexico and Santa Fe and Albuquerque, as opposed to.
Are you saying that Portales is not beautiful? I'm kidding.
So it was just jarring for me, a very different kind of barren landscape with a lot of feedlots. But no, but look, the people there were really great. So no, nothing against anyone there. We loved our 2 years there. It was a great place to start out, and had some really supportive, wonderful colleagues at ENMU.
Wonderful. Well, that's great that you've spent some time here. Of course, you, like many others, are in a more economically prosperous place there. So,
All
uh,
of your neighboring states. So
yes, Texas, of course, one of them, but Southern Methodist University has a very robust free market program, and I don't want to get into too much, but it's within. Is it within the business school there
yes,
at SMU?
right. Absolutely. So Tucker Bridwell is an SMU alum who is our lead donor for the Bridwell Institute. We prior to him coming on, we were the O'Neill Center. William O'Neill, the founder of Investors Business Daily, is also an SMU alum, but he has moved on, and it was a smooth transition. Same mission we've always had, but yeah, we're a research institute in the business school, and we focus on these economic freedom indexes because the director of the institute, Bob Lawson, is the lead author essentially on the one that ranks the countries, the economic freedom of the world. Ryan Murphy, another primary author on that one, is also with us, and then I do the state one and a local version that if we have time we could talk a little bit about, but it's very similar to the state one. But yeah, we believe, frankly, that policy matters, and that the states that have and countries or local areas that have more government intervention in the economy, people there tend to be less prosperous. They tend to do worse. The other thing they do is they tend to leave, right? And vote with their feet, like all of these California refugees we're seeing in Texas. It's these things matter, so we measure them and measure what matters, and the measures are by definition imperfect. As you said, the data is from 2022, and that's a limitation of government data providers, but that's just the way it works. It takes a while to get that data sorted and organized, and it's not a for-profit company doing it. It's government bureaucrats. No offense to them. Wow.
Well, briefly, let's. What is the connection between the Fraser Institute, which is a national free market think tank in Canada, and there are other indices. There's a lot of ranking of the states on various metrics, and we'll talk about the differences there. But sometimes you might have a tendency to see groups that want to put a finger on the scale or change a metric in order that some states that they're kind of critiquing doesn't do as well. But this is driven by a Canadian think tank. This report is nothing new in terms of you've done it for what, 20 years now?
This is the 20th edition of the Economic Freedom North America Report on the states and provinces. The country level one came out about 5, 6 years earlier, and you know the reason that Fraser is involved is that their guy Michael Walker, who's kind of emeritus now, he's still around but is kind of retired. He was one of the key people, like Jim Gwartney, Bob Lawson's boss at Florida State, that Milton Friedman and Gary Becker and Doug North and Friedrich Hayek and all these guys got together in the Cold War and saw all this data coming out of the Soviet Union. Oh, they're cleaning our clocks economically, right? And they said, wouldn't it be nice if we had a way to measure this, the degree of central planning, the degree of government intervention in the economy, so we could kind of test these hypotheses because the fudge data coming out of the Soviet Union and other in the Eastern Bloc, was puzzling or challenging to the notion that freedom matters and that people are more prosperous with freedom. So Milton Friedman, noted economist, organized this effort to find a way to measure it. They started with countries, and then a couple years later they branched out and it looked at states, because these differences happen not only across countries but within countries, and not only within states or across states within countries, but within local areas within states. There's different levels of intervention at local policy. Usually, state capitals are much more interventionist than others, but
Right.
that's how that works.
Well,
Yeah.
what is economic freedom as defined by you in this report?
Sure. So the textbook definition they came up with long ago is nah, I'm not going to read that. But the way I always look at it is kind of this libertarian notion that we all have the right to do with our resource, to use our resources, I should say, money, time, etc., however we wish, as long as we're not hurting someone. So the degree to which government impinges on that freedom of choice, essentially, that we as individuals have, at least in the economic realm, that we measure, that gives you less economic freedom, and so you get a lower score on our index. And I should note in passing, as I kind of alluded to there, we only measure things that kind of impact the economy directly, in a sense. But there are other freedoms, personal freedoms, as sometimes they're called, where those don't always correlate strongly with economic freedoms. For instance, in Texas, personal freedom is quite low, certainly lower than in New Mexico, and those things matter to people too, and they matter to me as well. But as an economist, and as it's a lot easier data wise to get good comparable stuff on economic factors rather than personal factors. So we focus on that. We think it's really important.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that economic freedom benefits everyone across the board. There are personal freedoms where I think you get people debating and discussing some of the moral issues and some of the lifestyle concerns and benefits for society. And I think you take a clear shot at the issue that really underpins quality of life for people all over the country and all over the world. So it's pretty self-evident, as your index points out every single time it's published, that increased economic freedom drives better outcomes for people, for individuals, for society. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah, and I think you can see some of this at the country level even more starkly, in the sense that you're way better off to be poor in a free country like the U.S. than to be middle class in a really economy with a really restrictive government. You just income per person, you're going to have much higher income, and so it's all about perspective, right? From our perspective, what we see as poor and poor standard of living is seen, as you see, many people coming across our borders to take advantage of economic opportunity here, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all, because it's an improvement for them, right? To come here and work for low wages, even illegally below minimum wages, and so that's the testament to the fact that we have so much freedom here that people will take all these great risks just to get here to be able to earn more money, which maybe seems like not much money to some of us, but who are we to say? If this person can improve their lot by moving to a freer country, more power to them, and we need them here. And not to get off into a side issue of immigration, but yeah. Anyway.
Right. So what specific variables broadly speaking, and if you want to drill down to a few that you feel are the most important, what what defines economic freedom? Not as a definition in the textbook, but in your index.
Right. So it kind of inside the box here, how we measure this. So we have 10 different variables. We break them into three categories. We look at basically three pieces of the government spending pie. And to make it comparable across states, we just take that total dollar figure for spending and divide it by personal income. So a wealthier state, will have a high level of income, but once you divide by income, you standardize for that, so you make it more comparable. And we do that in all the fiscal variables. We do the same thing for taxes, although with taxes, we add a fourth variable, which is the top personal income tax rate, because we feel like amongst the three major taxes, the income tax is by far most restrictive to economic freedom, right? You can avoid sales taxes to a certain extent. You can you avoid property taxes, kind of, but not really. But the income tax for sure, right? It punishes productivity, right? To the extent you go out and you be entrepreneurial or you work real hard at your job, you get a promotion, you get more money. Government's going to come in and not only take more taxes, but take a bigger percentage in most cases, and that's harmful. There's basically a double whammy for the income tax in the in the index, um, which New Mexico did surprisingly well. I pulled out the ranks and all this for the various variables, and that was not the income tax was not on the list of the ones that New Mexico does worst on. So that's to your credit, I guess. Although it seems like the rate's still pretty high. Um, and then the third category, so we got spending, revenue, or taxes, and then we look at some measures of labor market freedom. The first one is we take the minimum wage in the state and just multiply it out 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year to get an annual, what you would earn annually for full time at minimum wage. And then again, for comparability across states with different standards of living, we divide by per capita personal income. And on that one, New Mexico ranks 49th. The minimum wage full-time income is 45% of per capita personal income. And remember the data lag. This is based on the 1150 that went in 2022, $11.50, not the $12. Nor does it account directly for those higher local levels. You guys are one of the states that has, I think, believe it's 1236 in Las Cruces, 1250 in Albuquerque, and 1460 in Santa Fe. So it doesn't count for those higher ones, which we're going to get in there next year. I meant to do like a population weighted addition to capture those local ones, and frankly I just forgot. But even without that, so they'd probably be last if we added that piece in there. And then we look at the size of the bureaucracy, and the argument here, Paul, is that if you have a much larger share of your economy or of employment, your workforce working for government, well, that means that private employers have more competition to hire workers. So they've got to compete with their own tax dollars against their own tax dollars to hire workers. And here again, New Mexico is 49th, 14.2% of employment. Again, this is from 2022, is made up of government employees. And that's high, obviously. So those are two areas in particular where New Mexico could improve. And by the way, in 1987, I know that was a long time ago. A New York Times editorial page, not an op-ed by some outside person, their own editorial page editors had a headline that said the ideal minimum wage is zero. And I wholeheartedly agree that the minimum wage prices out low-skilled workers and does more harm than good. Sure, some people get that higher wage and benefit from it, but that's kind of the seen and the unseen, right? For Bastiat's thing, the broken window fallacy. You see the ones who still have their jobs and got that raise. You don't see the ones who either got fired or they didn't get that job because employers now are paying more, so they're hiring fewer workers, and it's the main problem is it's not targeted enough, right? It benefits everyone. It benefits middle class, upper class, high school students working just to earn beer money or whatever. And all right, maybe that's a bad example, but working hard, spending money, and so we can help those who need help. Or I say we shouldn't help low skilled workers, low income people, but the minimum wage is particularly poor, and it just throws off the labor markets. So that's and then the other two where I'd highlight that New Mexico does particularly poorly spending in the spending area. New Mexico ranks 49th, and in the labor market freedom they also rank 49th. So and the spending is pretty much all of areas of spending are really high as a percent of income. So and you know this, your listeners know this, that you have big government there, but there is always helpful to have some perspective outside because I think that Texas budget is too big, but other people look at it and they go, oh, come on, what are you doing?
Well, New Mexico has a couple things going on right now, and the big one is that we're in the midst of an unprecedented oil boom. I say unprecedented because very few states in American history, let alone currently, are undergoing that kind of revenue boom. Now, in another state with more fiscal conservatism, more of a focus on economic freedom, we could be cutting taxes and returning those dollars to the people of New Mexico. But in New Mexico, they're increasing spending dramatically. In fact, I think I saw a report from maybe Cato Institute that said that New Mexico had, yeah, actually, it was the report card on the governors
Scorecard, yeah.
that our governor, Lujan Grisham, during her 6 years so far, has increased spending faster than any other state. But even that doesn't nearly address all of the money that's flowed into our state. So they're putting it into these permanent funds and other kind of off-limit funds for the future, which sounds well and good, but in a state with as many needs as New Mexico has, we need to be doing things right away to improve our state. So,
Right.
yeah, so you look at
Amen.
your report, and we're right there, like you said, smack dab in the middle of all these economically free or relatively free places. And you rattled through some of the numbers and variables there. If Dean Stansel was not just governor, but maybe king of New Mexico, what do you look at as some of the first things to do to improve economic freedom?
Right. I think the very kind of challenge you just mentioned of how do you resist the urge to spend all this revenue pouring in is one that states like Colorado have solved in a sense by passing constitutional restrictions on the growth of the budget and basically requiring the politicians to, if you get too much, more than the cap, it has a cap right on the growth, you've got to return that to the people. And I think that's an excellent idea that all states should do. Unfortunately, not many have followed their lead, but Colorado, by the way, ranks 14th. New Mexico ranks 47th. Oklahoma's 11th. I don't know if you count Oklahoma as a neighbor. Texas is 5th, Utah 16th, and Arizona 32nd. So you got 5 that are in the top 16 surrounding New Mexico's 47th. And it's just, these relative things matter, right? If you're 47th, but your neighbors are 48, 49, 50, yeah, you're in good shape. Not in good shape, but better shape than if you're 47th and you've got 5th and 11th and 14th and 16th looking at you. And so what do? You've got to, like I said, just cap the growth. You've got to find some way to take decision making out, in a sense, take it off of autopilot, right? Require that politicians actually justify the spending of this money and tie their hands so that when you've got this revenue inflow you're speaking of, you don't just have an easy out to just let's go spend it, set up some new funds. I mean, I think rainy day funds are a useful tool, but the permanent funds thing you're talking about, I assume, are something a little more potentially troublesome.
Yeah. So, of course, with New Mexico, one of the things that's not included, and we've had these discussions, and it's worth noting that unlike any other report out there, the Rio Grande Foundation has a seat at the table in terms of how you all put these reports together. Talk about
Right.
briefly the essentially annual conversations that we have in Dallas at SMU's campus discussing some of these issues and the way to improve them. And there's one issue that I'll discuss in a second that's a constant bone of contention, but we can talk about it. But it's great that we get really smart people in a room to talk about how to use and how to improve upon this index. So talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to your last question, 2 quick things that I kind of alluded to earlier. But if I was king of New Mexico, I'd get rid of the minimum wage entirely. or at least come on, go back to the federal level, but also you shrink the bureaucracy, right? You've got the only one state has a bigger bureaucracy as a share of the total workforce, so you'd have to do that. Okay, so it was probably 6, 7 years ago now, or no, it was 10th. This last meeting we had in Dallas, and you were there. It was our 10th, and these at some point we just came up with this idea, kind of following what the Economic Freedom of the World Index people do with the country index. They'll meet once a year, bring in country level think tank people, and they all kind of get it together. And there's networking, but also from my perspective, what's so valuable about these meetings that people like Paul from the state think tanks attend is that it helps us to be able to hear from them, right? Feedback, how we can make this report more useful to them. And it gives us a way to kind of leverage the networks of these think tanks around the country in a way that we couldn't, right? And work with you to co-publish and then help, just basically spread the footprint of the Economic Freedom of North America report so that more people can understand the importance of the ideas of economic freedom. And yeah, we always get great feedback from you guys there, and we don't always implement it as quickly as you might like, but yes, we love it. It works out really well. And by the way, the other element of that is academics, right? So it brings together, and sometimes we'll have academics and think tank people who didn't even know each other yet who will meet, and then they from the same state, and then they can collaborate together on things. So it's a great mix of academics and policy people, in my opinion. I love it. Thanks for coming out so many times.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and then one of the things that I understand the arguments on both sides, but New Mexico's oil and gas uh, revenues, which are
Yes.
a tax, are not included in our tax burden. They are included ultimately in our spending, but that's only when it's spent, not when it's collected. Uh,
Right.
and that's just the way the variables operate. And I don't know if you want to briefly
Yes, I do.
kind of analyze both
Defend
sides.
myself.
Oh yeah, well
No,
yeah,
no, it's not that it's an attack. No, I hear you.
yes,
No, no, the reason that we do that, and there are a handful of states like Alaska and New Mexico where it is really a big percentage of revenue, is that in our opinion, these taxes on natural resources, oil, timber, what have you, are not borne by the people of that state entirely. They're spread across consumers of whatever that resource is, not only across the country but across the globe. And so to say that Alabama's huge amount of severance tax, or Alaska, I should say, Alaska or New Mexico's huge amount of severance tax revenue proportionally reduces economic freedom that much, I think is wrong. And paints a poor picture, but as you can see, the disparity of the rankings, you're right. Spending, hey, we don't pull that out of spending. So spending, New Mexico ranks 49th, taxes they rank 36th. And that disparity is largely due to that big chunk of severance revenue that they are spending and being punished on the index for that. But the tax side, they get kind of a free ride and still end up 47th. So yeah, you want them 50th, right? I mean, I think if we put that in there, well, Alaska might outdo you if we put that piece in, but yeah, it's
you'd be surprised. Alaska oil production and revenues are kind of dropping. New Mexico is really growing fast. That's why we're now the second
right.
biggest producer of oil in the country. So, I
One
honestly,
more. Go ahead. No,
47th or 50th, it doesn't matter. We keep
no.
electing people who don't understand and are, just because they keep getting reelected, unwilling to even contemplate the idea of economic freedom. And that's the real frustration. It's not that it's difficult or a real challenge. In a lot of states, there are real challenges with addressing economic freedom politically. I wouldn't want to try to move California in a more pro freedom direction. It'd be a very challenging proposition because I don't think the people are necessarily attuned to that at this point in time. But New Mexico has the money. We have the resources available, at least on the taxation front, to really do some amazing things, and that could obviously unlock a great deal of growth and prosperity in our state. Sorry, you were making a point.
Yeah, well, just one more point on that severance tax thing is that when world oil markets oil prices change, then that severance revenue goes up and down and fluctuates, and then the economic freedom score goes up and down if you have it in there. But one thing that just occurred to me, I never really thought of this, is that what does Alaska do that's kind of helpful to their taxpayers? They return that revenue to the people every year, and it's something to consider in a sense that then you are really, yes, you're collecting that revenue from the sale of these goods that go all over the world, but you're also then rebating it back to the people so that your New Mexico taxpayers don't have such a huge tax burden. I don't know. I assume that's never really been something that's been thought of there or discussed. I know you
Oh,
had a
it's
really
it's been
free
discussed.
market governor at some point. Gary Johnson was there for 2 years, right? I mean, two terms. I mean,
Yeah, the
been a
problem
while.
was, Gary's a long time ago, and we've only been in this economic or this oil boom for just under a decade, really. It's a relatively new thing, and it's kind of an extreme factor in terms of uh, the economic situation
Mhm.
because it's come on so suddenly. Basically, new findings in the Permian Basin and new
Okay.
revenue sources. So we're not in a revenue or a price-driven boom, unlike in the past. We're in a production-driven boom. Obviously, price matters, and you get more money out of the industry when the prices are high than when they're low. But Texas, your home state, is top dog when it comes to oil production, and I think North Dakota's three. And you get all of those states have more money to play with and either use for the benefit of the citizens or um, sock away for the benefit of the politicians. So let's talk about states that do well and poorly in economic freedom. So uh, obviously, New Mexico's way down the list at 47th. The three states worse than us are Hawaii, Alaska, and New York. New
California,
York,
Hawaii, California, New York.
or yeah, Hawaii, California, New York. Sorry,
That's
two
it.
big states that you know kind of you look at the Texas versus California economic model, or sometimes it's the Texas and Florida economic model versus the California and New York
Right.
economic model. What obviously we everybody kind of intuitively knows that uh, two of those are really economically free, two of those are not economically free. But how does that play out in your report, and how do you see that in the real world?
Sure. No, that's been a real tangible story for years now. And literally, New York is 50th, California is 49th. Our four largest states not only have slightly different policies, they have polar opposite policies, right? You've got Florida at third and Texas at fifth. And you see very different outcomes in those states as well, with Florida and Texas seeing huge population growth. California, New York, like New Mexico as well, the past couple of years is actually losing population. Population is declining there, and that's just people voting with their feet. And you mentioned it would be hard to change California. It's getting harder every day because a lot of people here in Texas fear kind of Californication of uh, of the state with all these Californians moving here, and that's the same issue, frankly, with international immigration. The assumption would have to be, if you're worried about this, that these guys are going to leave California, come to Texas, and start approving and supporting the things that they were going on in the state they just left. Now, people move for a lot of reasons. I'm not saying it's all public policy, but the larger point is what Texas is getting is a lot of the Californians who are just fed up with high cost of living, high taxes, and they don't agree with those policies. So we got nothing to fear. A couple of years ago, when it was Cruz and O'Rourke in the Senate race, they did an exit poll, Paul, and they asked you, "Are you a Texas native, or have you moved here within the last 5 years?" Those who were Texas natives voted for the Democrat by about a 5% margin. Those who were immigrants from wherever voted for the Republican by a substantial margin. Now, I'm not a Republican; I'm a libertarian, but it kind of defies the narrative that they're going to come in here and turn Texas purple or whatever, or blue or whatever it is. And I just don't. I don't. I think it's somewhat of a risk, but I don't see it as big of an issue as it is. People are sorting themselves out by preference, and but it will make it harder for California, and New York has the same exact issue going on. It'll make it harder for policy advocates there to really convince the politicians to move things in a pro freedom direction. Unfortunately,
Yeah, and once that outflow starts, it's kind of hard to stop it. Those
right?
people leaving tend to be higher educated, have money, wherewithal to move, and that's the same for immigrants. Obviously, preferably in a system that functions and has legal immigration. Obviously, illegal immigration, it has a lot of other issues associated with it. But just focusing on state to state migration, losing your best and brightest, losing your talent, making your state a place where people are no longer going to, but fleeing from, has a whole host of challenges associated with it. Uh, I would expect that things are not going to turn around in California in the near future. New Mexico, on the other hand, we're a relatively small population state. We have beautiful weather. We're located in the fastest growing part of the country. Um, California is also a beautiful place. They probably have a little more opportunity to turn things around than New York, which is obviously hindered by its weather. Did you factor in any of those kinds of things? Like obviously,
I
um,
mean,
weather is a determining factor for a lot of people and where they choose to live. Does that affect economic freedom, or you just look at the map and you see obviously New York, Vermont, Rhode Island, not New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and West Virginia is a beautiful state, but and it's not the worst weather, but not a lot of economic freedom in the northeast part of the country.
right, right. No, it's weather is certainly a factor that matters for people, but we don't count it in the economic freedom index at all. But yeah, it is kind of true that most of the greater levels of freedom are in that kind of Sun Belt area, with the exception of right up the middle with the Dakotas and Nebraska there. Um, but sure, the New York governor at some point came out and basically acknowledged that the their high tax rates, their high income tax rates are what's causing all their millionaires to flee, which of course is a problem if you want to charge high taxes on millionaires. Well, you can't do that if they don't live there. So New York is struggling in that sense, and I think that there's been a lot of income tax reductions across the country in recent years. I think over half the states have done something to reduce rates. So I mean, there is some momentum there, and in your state, when you have this kind of revenue boom from the natural resources, that provides an easier opportunity. Not It's never easy, but an easier opportunity to put in some reductions in your income tax rate or elsewhere. But just to do something to shrink that kind of cost of living, that burden of taxes that your taxpayers have to deal with, and the lower you can get, the better off for them. The more look, the taxes basically take money out of people's hands, and instead of private decision makers deciding how it's used, you've got political decision makers deciding how it's used, and the political decision making process is not pretty, and people are spending other people's money, so they don't do it very carefully. So yeah, in my view, just whenever possible, let's let people keep their money and be responsible for their own stuff. And that's not the dominant philosophy in states like New Mexico, California, and New York, unfortunately.
So let's talk about Texas for a minute. Of course, widely known that Texas has no personal income tax. They are in the most free quadrant, although I didn't check exactly. They're
Fifth,
not, yeah, they're not at the top.
right?
Interestingly, Oklahoma, which does have a personal income tax, is higher than Texas. But
They're 11th.
nonetheless,
Well, they're in the same color, but yeah, they're 11th.
yeah,
Texas is fifth. That's good. Yeah.
but Texas, or well, are we? So I'm looking at the. Oh,
Table
okay.
one
That
point.
was the not the all government level. I
Oh,
apologize.
gotcha. Yeah.
And
That's for
one thing of the
Canadians.
report is that, and we could talk about briefly, as there is the state level policies versus the state and federal combined level policies, and that's where
Right.
that discrepancy was. But Texas is
Yeah.
one of the most economically free places in the country. Although, uh, you know, folks don't like their property tax down there in
Yes,
Texas.
that's right.
But what is Texas by and large doing right, and what are a few areas they need to work on? I mean, obviously it's night and day between them and New Mexico.
Right.
Fifth most free versus yeah, third, fourth least free. So, what's Texas doing well?
I mean, number one has to be the fact that there's no income tax because that goes a long way, particularly for your high income migrants. Because what you see is like the CEOs, the head of companies in California, paying, I think they're at a 14% just state level rate, max rate. They can save an enormous amount of money just by pulling out their headquarters, moving it to Texas, and of course, then a lot of their workers will follow. And so you're getting that population growth, you're getting that movement of, in many cases, big high income taxpayers. If New Mexico didn't have an income tax, some of those migrants would stop in New Mexico. Why keep going to Texas, right? If New Mexico was similarly low tax and business friendly, and that's the other piece of this that is hard to measure, kind of uh, empirically or directly at all, but the degree to which Texas policies are friendly to business, the degree to which it's much easier than in other states to open a business and to keep that business running without a lot of, you know, excessive regulation from government bureaucrats, and so those two things really, I think, drive a lot of this population migration. The explicit goal of lowering your tax burden, and as well as just making it easier to operate your business.
Yeah, got it. And you know, economic freedom and being pro-business are not obviously completely aligned. They're generally in the same ballpark. If you're economically free, you're by and large going to be pro-business. But sometimes you get into subsidies, and that's not really a
Right.
part of your report. Although, if you're using, if you have the choice to reduce your income tax even by a tiny fraction, or hand business X, Y, and Z a subsidy package, the way to go would be to lower your income tax, right?
Absolutely. And that spending, assuming that money is then spent on some sort of spending program for these economic development subsidies, that would be captured. Just as if instead it was used as an income tax cut, that would be captured in a positive way, the other in a negative way. And yeah, the whole pro business, I think a lot of times by our critics, especially, they lump us together, right? So pro business could be crony capitalism, right? You've got, as you said, subsidies to big business or small business, but subsidies to encourage businesses to move from other places. And policies, not only that, but policies that kind of put in place restrictions on competition. And that can include even things like tariffs to try to protect domestic industry. That stuff is technically pro business, right? But it's not pro freedom because it's having different rules of the game for different taxpayers and different businesses, and so yeah, that stuff is pervasive, and it needs to go. But good luck with that. It's yeah, those ribbon cutting ceremonies are just too valuable, and to kind of point to, well, if we didn't do these subsidies, we'd have, these entrepreneurs over here would have an easier time. Well, they're not having a ceremony for that, right? So as a politician, you can't point to that and take the same credit as you could
Yeah,
with the.
yeah. The political aspect is hard to overcome, but
Yeah.
um, obviously some states do it better than others. Let's talk briefly about Arizona, a state that often New Mexico competes with. Texas is uh, certainly has its charms, geographically speaking, but when New Mexicans look at Texas, they see just a big flat, open expanse of land, whereas we have the mountains, the skiing, all the kinds of outdoor open spaces that Texas doesn't really have. But Arizona does have a lot of those, and a lot of folks move to Arizona from New Mexico to take advantage of various options, obviously professional sports, booming population, economic growth, and dynamism. At least in your report, though, they don't perform all that well in terms of economic freedom. And I remember them performing better, if I'm not mistaken, What's going on in Arizona? Because I always consider them to be a pretty economically free state. They're in the third quartile, not quite as
Right.
bad as New Mexico.
Right. So they're 32nd this year, kind of middle of the pack, but yeah, below average in that third quartile. There's been a substantial decline over the past 6 years of our data set, where 2016 data, Arizona was ranked ninth. So yeah, there's been a substantial decline over the years, and to be honest, Paul, I don't know exactly why the spending numbers are a big part of it, in terms of the three areas of the index, but I'd have to drill down a little deeper to see what it is they're spending on, but they have a spending problem that's largely that in the labor market freedom area as well, somewhat, but the tax area looks okay compared to the other states, at
Yeah,
least.
they've kind of bounced around. They had a ballot measure that allowed substantial tax increases, and then uh, I think their minimum wage went really up, and that
Mm,
might be part of the equation. And
yep.
you know, uh, it's just curious because obviously they don't have any oil and gas in Arizona, but it's a much faster, much more dynamic state than New Mexico. Colorado, you mentioned, and Colorado is actually hanging tough. It's the only kind of classical blue state like New Mexico, except for they have that taxpayer bill of rights, which limits their politicians' spending, so they can elect the progressives like Jared Polis and still hang tough on your study here, which they're they're second out of the top second quartile. So
Yeah, they're 14th, tied for 14th.
yeah,
Yeah, that those measures usually kind of erode over time as politicians, those like the taxpayer bill of rights, for example, those spending caps or revenue caps, they usually tend to erode over time as politicians find ways to carve loopholes in them. And apparently, this one's held up fairly well, because you're right, they've not. It's not like they've had a bunch of fiscal conservatives in the governor's house there. But yeah, Colorado is a serious adjustment, or sorry, challenger here, competitor when it comes to economic freedom for New Mexico, since it's neighboring, but for a lot of places, a lot of those California refugees are heading a little north to Colorado instead of Texas.
yeah, eventually they're going to have to reckon with their constant electing very left wing politicians. The taxpayers bill of rights is kind of something I've learned is that institutional barriers like the taxpayer bill of rights can only withstand the political forces unleashed upon them for so long. If like the U.S. Constitution or anything else, it's like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. They will find a way, and you keep electing leftists, and they will eventually find a way to grow, expand governments, obtain political power. So, Dean, we're almost at the end of our time here. I want to make sure that you know you get errorsoфenchantment.com as the location you can find all of this reporting linked to, but FraserInstitute.org is FRASER Institute.org is the name of is the website where you can find this publication. And you guys have, like you said, you have a local economic freedom index, and if you want to briefly describe that, and then you have an index relating to the entire world at the Fraser
Right, sure.
Institute.
So
Not that you're
so
involved in
brief,
either of those, but
yeah. Briefly, before I even got involved with the EFTA, this is the one that just came out. Is I think the 12th is the 12th one I've been involved with, but I had been working a lot with local data, same kind of issues, and I was looking at the EFTA and I at the variables in the EFTA, and I was like, I know I can get all of these at the county level, and then we just metropolitan areas or collections of counties, and then just add up the counties. So it was a pretty straightforward adaptation or extension of what was already being done with countries and states. And the whole point is that just like the state level report is important because policy differs within countries. So just looking at countries hides some of that detail because you're not drilling down all the way to the local level. Same thing with the states, right? Policies within states, like in Texas, Austin has a way more activist government than the ones in Dallas and Houston and Fort Worth, and so yeah, those local differences matter too, and so yeah, New Mexico, and the results mirror pretty closely the FNA. It's just that you have different colors within the state, different colors on the map. But yeah, New Mexico's metros do pretty poorly, just like the state does. Florida's and Texas do really well. California and New York at the bottom. And then the country level one that you referenced is we came out fifth this year, it looks like, and we were as high as third a long time ago, but yeah, the U.S. has went down, declined for quite a while, but it's kind of bounced back, and Hong Kong is up there in first still, even though things are in flux there, of course. But you know, we grade with all of these things, we grade on a curve. So people say, well, how is Hong Kong still at the top? Well, because relative to everyone else, they're still doing it pretty well. If we didn't grade on a curve, everyone would fail, right? Everyone, country or state would get an F. So it's not saying they're perfect just because they're at the top. It's saying that they're more perfect than all the other imperfect ones. But
All right.
so yeah,
Well, thanks, Dean. Your
absolutely.
social
Thanks for
media, if
having me
you
on.
want to have people follow you on X.
Sure. I'm at just Dean Stansel at Dean Stansel, DeanStansel, and the same for Facebook and LinkedIn. And I haven't used Instagram yet, although I have it. I just but one of these days, Paul, I'll get
That's
to it.
okay. X is where it's at. So
Is it
thanks for
okay?
listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.